Welcome back to MindTalk, a safe space where we have informative discussions on mental wellness. The topic for the season is bipolar disorder, and in our last episode, we spoke with our first guest on our show, Mr. Hanif E.A. Benjamin, who gave us some insightful knowledge on bipolar disorder. Today, we're joined again by Mr. Hanif E.A. Benjamin for part 2 of this highly informative interview and to dig deeper into the diagnosis that is bipolar disorder. So before we begin, I would like to reintroduce Mr. Hanif. He is a clinical therapist, traumatologist, and a forensic traumatologist specialist who is certified in child trauma. He is also the founder, president, and chief executive officer of the Center for Human Development Limited, a dynamic trauma-informed psychological and counseling company in Trinidad and Tobago and the region. Thank you very much for joining us again, Mr. Benjamin.
Thank you so much, Chris, for having me. It's always a pleasure to share my knowledge with all who would listen.
Thank you. So, in our last episode, you gave us your professional definition of what bipolar disorder is and the effects that can incur to someone who is diagnosed with the disorder. Now, I want to talk to you about bipolar disorder from a cultural aspect. So, my first question is, what are the cultural attributes and stigmas surrounding mental health, especially bipolar disorder in Trinidad and Tobago?
You know, that's a powerful question in relation. Well, the question is two parts. The cultural nuances as well as the stigma that is associated with overall mental health, not just bipolar disorder. And so the cultural challenges we face is knowledge, and I guess for both the cultural and the other one. And so knowledge is the first one because let's start with teenagers, with children. What do we call the teenagers? We say they're going through the bipolar years, right? Because their mood is always moving, and so that has been a running joke for generations. And then we have in Trinidad and Tobago the socially displaced people, or what we call the madman on the street. And when you look at the socially displaced persons, we immediately attribute bipolar, schizophrenia to these people. And so culturally, we see bipolar as being, the madman, the madman. We see it as people who really can't control themselves. So even in the workplace, if somebody has an outburst or an altercation, whatever it is, you would always find these subtle saying, she are bipolar, or he are bipolar. Even in your friend group, I don't know if you ever experienced it, even in your friend group, like you are bipolar.
Yeah, we make those jokes.
Yeah, we make very weird kind of comments when it comes to bipolar. We don't say like you have depression or you have anxiety or anything, but you'll say you are bipolar, that kind of scenario. So it always seems as if we're making fun of what bipolar is and what it should look like, but in actuality, bipolar is a lifelong mental disease that is of significant importance to people who is living with this disease, because it literally alters the way your life is and what it should have been, and requires a level of treatment that chances are going to last for life.
Right.
But nobody culturally talks about the people who are living with bipolar and getting up every day and going to work, getting up every day and seeing about their children, getting up every day and going to university and or school, So we have that challenge, and that is why I started with education, because too often people are afraid of what they don't know, and what they see scares them. And so on the further end of the spectrum, with somebody living with bipolar, it can be scary for the individual, for the family members. And as a matter of fact, that is why most persons who are living with bipolar on the further end of the spectrum ends up on the street, because despite And in spite of the family's best effort, they could not have coped. And unfortunately, in Trinidad and Tobago, there is little to no type of support for the family of persons living with mental illness, especially bipolar. And given that bipolar is such, on the far end of the spectrum, such a challenging diagnosis, for the caregiver, there is no real help to guide them along. What can they do to make things work? How can they make it work? You see? And so, if we begin to educate people on diagnoses, what it looked like, what it sounds like, what it feels like, then people would be able to get up and say, you know what? This is not as scary as I thought it was. And when I see this behavior, I can then do this. And so, let me just spend a few minutes on the stigma.
Okay.
Yes. In Trinidad and Tobago, and this part of the world, I mean all over, the stigma with mental health is real.
Right.
And it is for those reasons that I postulated above, which is, you know, being able to understand what mental health is, being able to understand what it looks like, being able to help persons themselves recognize when they are in fact dealing with a diagnosis. And people are ashamed, people are afraid to verbalize that they are living with a mental illness, because the man next to them will say, well, you mad, you crazy. And so because of that shame of being called out or being called crazy, and of course I told you what crazy is linked with, right? The man on the street, St. Anne's, Ward 1 in San Fernando.
Right.
They live and they suffer in silence. Rather than come forward and seek help in the main, they remain in silence because they don't want anybody to know what they're dealing with. They don't want anybody to know that are going to a doctor or a psychologist.
Right.
I don't want anybody to know that on medication. Albeit, you take medication for your heart, your foot, your liver, your lungs, your eye, your toe. But when it comes to medication for the mind, we are ashamed. And so a lot of psychoeducation must happen to remove the stigma that we are facing. A lot of, because I made the point just recently that every government building, every public building should have posters, pamphlets treating with mental illness.
Right.
If people know what it is and understand what it is, as I said prior, they won't be afraid. But if they don't know what it is, the other major concern is access.
Right.
While we have made moves and strides in Trinidad and Tobago, access to mental health, sustained and specialized treatment is still lacking. The average man don't know where to go for mental health treatment. The average man don't know what to do when they are going through a mental health crisis. Our hospitals are designed to deal with crises, full stop. It's not a treatment facility, so you don't go there for treatment. You go ever so often in your clinic to get your medication and stuff. But mental health requires an intense and persistent level of treatment. And if it is that a person has to wait 3 months, 4 months before they can see the therapist or counselor again, what happens in those intervening months? You know, and that is why I believe people are living longer with diagnoses and people on medication longer because of the infrequency of therapy. And therapy is used to help a person to develop coping mechanisms, to develop behavioral pattern or change behavioral pattern. But if that is not happening, then all they're doing is waiting for medication.
Right.
And so the stigma continues to be very pervasive in our society. The stigma continues to be the thing that keeps mental health where it is. Then we're talking about the law, changing the law. And once you change the law, the legislation that treats with mental health, and we put some of those measures in there, then we can probably see where the stigma would begin to be eroded, you see.
So, but I would like to know from your experience professionally, dealing with people who have bipolar disorder, who live with bipolar disorder rather, what are some of the challenges that you are faced with these patients?
Well, I don't know. I don't see challenges. I see opportunities. You see.
Okay.
I see opportunities for people to live a meaningful life, because regardless of bipolar, schizophrenia, schizotypal, some of these personality disorders are lifetime disorders.
Right.
You can enjoy a full, healthy life. That is why I tell people, why live in silence, suffering, when you can come forward and actually be released. Even though you're on medication, you can still enjoy life. So I don't see a challenge. I don't see a challenge with any of my clients.
Okay.
I see opportunities for them to really make a difference in their own life, because we truly believe here at the Center for Human Development that clients are in charge of their own destiny, you know. Our role is just to help them along the way using theories, modality, and practice.
Okay,
But they come in and they know exactly where they want to go, how they want to go. We're just going to help them do that.
For our final question, you spoke about eroding the stigma in our first question. Is there anything else as citizens of Trinidad and Tobago we can do to make life easier for people living with bipolar disorder?
Be kind. Be kind. We have grown up in a medical society where we are kind to the man on the wheelchair, the man with the cast on his hand, the woman with her stitches, or the patch around the eye. We open the door, but we have not trained ourselves to be kind to people living with mental health, because we can't see it. We think people living with mental health are lazy and they should open the blind and go and take a walk, and those things should fix. But in actuality, if we are kind to people, people will be able to open up more and be freer to say, I am living with this. People on the job site, people in the universities will say, I am struggling, I need help. But if we are not kind to people, if we are not open to kindness, then people will continue to be in their own shell.
Thank you very much. Well, there you have it. Another insightful talk with Mr. Hanif E.A. Benjamin. I would like to thank you again for educating us on bipolar disorder and mental wellness on the whole.
Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure, and good luck.
Thank you very much. I'd also like to thank our listeners who tuned into this episode of MindTalk. And don't forget to click the button and subscribe and for notifications on new episodes here on YouTube. Also follow us on Instagram, MindTalk.tt, where you can see teasers for upcoming episodes and of the podcast and additional content on bipolar disorder. Okay, so until next time, stay safe and stay happy.